Alright, y'all. Week 1, Roland Garros has been a doozy. I was actually going to drop this video yesterday. I guess I'm glad now that I didn't, ahead of the quarterfinals and a very eventful Monday today. Day 1, Week 2, Roland Garros, both men's quarterfinals on Chatrier today, going the distance. And now we are moving to the quarterfinals with a lot of our usual suspects. Obviously, going into Roland Garros this year, it felt like this was the most wide-open slam in quite some time, but that has kind of self-corrected itself with all the uncertainty at the top. You still see your top three, Djokovic, Alcaraz, Sinner, all in the quarterfinals now. All, I guess, with vastly different roads there. And then you have your next-gen guys, Zverev, Tsitsipas, guys that have historically excelled on clay, holding their own, continuing strong form, strong clay court seasons, or ends to their clay court seasons, carrying over into Roland Garros. So yeah, let's get into it. A lot to unpack here. I know I didn't do the preview for this tournament. I did have my predictions up on my podcast again on Spotify. Link in the description below. I apologize for not plugging that more. But these were pretty much my predictions. I had a couple of whiffs in there, a couple of hits. The typical mixed bag for when you put together these sort of immediate post-draw pre-tournament predictions. Pre-tournament, I was very, very hesitant. You know, it seemed like the math wasn't mathing to still have the top four seeds making the semifinals this year. But it is Roland Garros, and traditionally, at least in recent years, this has been the slam where, you know, I think most often you see 1, 2, 3, 4 end up making the semifinals. But really, you know, what it came down for me pre-tournament is I didn't really see the type of threats, at least for Alcaraz, Sinner. No real roadblocks for them as long as health permitted them to be around like 80% save themselves. And like I said in my clay court season video, you know, I'm still gonna hang in there with Novak Djokovic in best of 5. It's just something you don't really bet against regardless of how spotty his form has been this year. And as for Zverev, saw a good draw for him, and he may never get a chance as good as this one, so, you know, I figured he's going to make good on at least making the semifinals because of that. And with what I've seen in this tournament, I am even more confident in that. Maybe less so in Novak now, but, you know, let's get into the specifics of what's gone down. Let's start with the man himself, still the world number one, Novak Djokovic, coming in now into the quarterfinals off of 2 straight 4.5 hour, roughly 5-set wins. Even putting him through to the semifinals, I don't think I was extremely high on Djokovic winning this title this year. And after these 2 matches, it feels like the road forward for him to win that 4th French Open title is even more of an uphill battle now. But, you know, for Nole Femme, that should be secondary. I think you come out of this tournament, no matter how it ends for Djokovic, with a lot of those motivation questions answered. He most definitely still cares about this tennis stuff. When he was in a bit of a bind against Musetti there in the 3rd round, John McEnroe on Peacock made a pretty good point where, you know, he was questioning whether Novak would really feel like he needed this one. And yeah, you think about it, he's the undisputed GOAT. His only active challenger for that slam count probably only has like a couple of major appearances left, if that. He found himself down 2-1 well past midnight at about 1:30 a.m. in heavy conditions that were causing him problems. And yeah, it's not one that he needed, but he dug in, found the reserves, turned on the afterburners to pull away in the end anyways. And honestly, I found Musetti's level in that match to be higher than it was when he beat Djokovic in Monte Carlo, when he went up 2 sets against Novak at the French 3 years ago. Lorenzo really played tremendously, competed tremendously. In spite of the lopsided last two sets, it's not like he completely went away like he did in 2021. In fact, it was really fascinating because the conditions were so heavy and Musetti was able to get his racket on so many balls, use his athleticism. He really ended up exploiting the Djokovic weakness in the overhead smash as much as I think you really can. Some really tremendous defense, tremendous lobs from Musetti to steal a handful of points. And, third set aside, when Djokovic sort of dialed back, it was a boxer putting down his gloves, per se, to conserve energy. But that aside, I think in this match, at least for 80% of it, you saw a pretty good level from Novak Djokovic. You could argue maybe he let the second get away 4-1 up and also having a set point in the tiebreak. But it truly was an inspired effort from his opponent to get back in it. For a good stretch there, Musetti really was redlining, playing the best I think I've ever seen him play. And yeah, considering the year he's had, considering the motivation questions, we hadn't seen Djokovic really dig in and claw himself out of one of these situations with his back to the wall. Something that's, become his trademark we've seen so often. And as mentioned earlier, this felt like one that he didn't really need. Honestly, would have been totally understandable tapping out with the, ridiculousness of his scheduling situation starting out there at like 11 p.m. But as we know, tapping out is not in his vocabulary, especially in these Grand Slams, and he really pushed himself to the limit, to exhaustion, doubled over, huffing and puffing several times, really throughout the entire match, but especially in those fourth and fifth set, it seemed like all the restraint was off. He was ready to lay it all out on the line to get across the finish line, and yeah, as I said, I think Musetti still competed reasonably well in the fourth and fifth, did plenty of road work, and it seemed to catch up with him a little bit at the end, but it's not like he gave up like he did, 3 years ago. It just seemed like Djokovic found his A game and never looked back. Pulled off probably his best win of 2024, all things considered. And then, of course, we get to today against Fran Cerundolo in the fourth round. It seemed early on Djokovic understood the assignment, wanted to make quick work of this, not have to spend too much time on court, and refuel a little bit before the back end of this tournament. And last game of the set aside, things are going totally according to plan. He breezed through the first 6-1. A little bit of difficulty in the last game of the set serving it out. That seemed to carry over into the second, obviously, early on. Got the knee checked out in the medical timeout. But even in spite of that, and Novak really not looking himself for a while the rest of the match, with the amount of opportunities Cerundolo was squandering there, I think he was like 0 of 11 before he finally took a break point. Seemed like it had the makings of one of those typical, your opponent has the chances. Once they get their teeth into the match, don't take them, and it turns into something like 6-1, 7-6, 6-3. And up until Cerundolo broke for the second set at 5-6, it certainly seemed we were headed that way. And, Fran, one of the best forehands in the world, pretty great clay courter in his own right, having a down year a little bit compared to what he did last year. But from that point, it really seemed like the ball was in his court, and, it might be overcoming his own demons from last year when he had Holger dead to rights in, I believe, the same stage, fourth round, but, let him off the hook a little bit there. But with Novak Djokovic, completely hampered there for this stint of the match, even let, Fran off the hook at like 5-3, 30 all, I think it was, where trying to serve out the third set, Fran, visibly tightened up, second serve, and Djokovic completely air-mailed the second serve return, something you just don't see from him. After that, I'll admit, until he got back on serve at 4-all in the fourth set, I didn't really get to watch much, but I did see, Fran got the early break, I think, to go up 3-2 in the fourth set. But regardless of having watched it or not, you knew he had to get it done in 4. He had to get it done that set. because, once Novak gets a lifeline, you really have to be a tier 1 all-time great or, generational player like an Alcaraz at Wimbledon last year to be able to slam on the brakes and really try to do anything about sort of keeping his momentum in check. And to his credit, Cerundolo still asked plenty of questions of Novak. Had a break point that, he'll probably want back with a look at a down-the-line backhand pass at 5-all, 30-40. But you'd have to say, late in the fourth set, after, Fran let him back in, get back on serve, through the end of this match, that Novak, it was him that really started coming up with the goods. He upped his aggression, and he did what he does. I do have to give props to Cerundolo for, making the fifth still probably the most watchable, most entertaining set of the match. He really did all you can ask still in the fifth, even though it was a nervy end to the fourth. After going down an early 2-0, surrendering the early break, he broke back and, did all he could to stay on serve till the end. Even 3-4, 40 love. Ended up losing that game for the, final nail in the coffin, but not much he really did wrong at all. And yeah, regardless of how this tournament ends, there's no doubt, there's a lot to be proud of here. There's, probably some great memories here in the Djokovic time capsule. Because, it is what he does, but he is now 37 years old, and he just came through, 2 inspired opponents, 4.5 hours each back-to-back. So yeah, you gotta tip your cap to Novak Djokovic for still having a pulse in this tournament, and that's really all you can ask for. Now let's talk about the other 2 big favorites for this tournament. Let's start with Jannik Sinner. Still been the best player in the game this year. First real hitch in his year, the hip injury in Madrid. Seemed for a good part of his time off that he wouldn't play Roland Garros. But here he is, and honestly, for the most part, he is looking pretty good. Aside from what the hell is going on right now, first 40 minutes of the Mute match where he started down a set and a break in the fourth round. He's looked exactly how he's looked all year, pretty much. And that's pretty imperious. I looked at Sinner coming into this tournament. I think he, of the top guys, had the best draw. And again, as long as he was, around 75-80% level, I thought that would be good enough to get through this draw, whether it was Hubie, whether it was Dimitrov waiting for him in the quarter. This fourth round was supposed to be Yari. I never really had faith in him actually beating Sinner, but his super inconsistent 2024 continues, finalist at Rome, and he crashed out in the first round of Mute. But for Jannik's part, I think Pavel Kotov in the third round played really well against him, and I thought Sinner put in probably his best performance of the tournament to, get out of there in straight sets. And now he gets Grigor Dimitrov, someone who, this version of Sinner I think has had a pretty good holdover. Shout out Grigor, by the way, super impressive achievement to finally, at age 33, complete the set of big event quarterfinals, and also, all 4 slams, finally get his first quarter at the French. I thought Hubie would finally get him, for the first time here, just given, Hurkacz's by far best clay court season of his career. I do have my eyes on him to, make some noise during grass court season in Wimbledon. But with him and Grigor, same story. Grigor continues to own him. Strangely enough, moves to 7-0 in tiebreakers against, a server of Hubie's caliber. But, overall, you gotta be super happy for Dimitrov. What a last 18 months he's had. And, let's see how Jannik handles Grigor. He's up quite a few weight classes from, the guys that Sinner has faced to this point in the tournament. But like I said, Sinner seems to be in pretty good form, and, he seems to have a pretty good hold on Dimitrov right now, regardless of, the fact that it's a different surface. But he is coming off beating Grigor pretty handily very recently in the Miami final. You never know when Pete Grigor can show up. It's always a possibility. But obviously, you gotta make Sinner a big favorite there. And he seems poised to do his part in a potential Sinner-Garaz semifinal. And speaking of which, his contemporary, the guy that I have now picked to win this title for the third straight year, hopefully third time's the charm. But Carlos Alcaraz is finally rounding into form. It's been a very injury-marred year for Alcaraz. Pretty minimal clay court action for him out there, and even when he did play in Madrid, he was not close to 100%. Still seemed like he was a bit edgy with going full throttle on that forehand through the first two rounds of this tournament. But that Korda match in the third round could prove to be a turning point for him. Several points during that match where it seemed like, he was grinning to his box. Juan Carlos Ferrero seemed like, he was just like, holy crap, I got my forehand back. I don't got to worry about holding back. And obviously that had to be super liberating. Korda, for his part, I think played a really good match in that one. But Alcaraz, again, looking as close to 100% as he has since Indian Wells, backed up that performance with another really solid showing against FAA, who, he didn't play great in his right, but Carlos still had his fair share of highlights, as he does. And obviously, rediscovering this form, operating at this level, he is just super tough. It requires, a performance where you're going to need to suffer. It's going to be physical. And Felix not up to that challenge against him. Now he's going to get another crack at Stefanos Tsitsipas, a rematch of their quarterfinal last year. Should be more competitive than it was last year. Tsitsipas in considerably better form this clay court season than last. Obviously, he did benefit from a good deal of choking from Matteo Arnaldi in the second set. But aside from that, Tsitsipas has been clean as a whistle, really. But against Carlos, it's obviously going to be super interesting to see how he adjusts in a matchup where he's been having seemingly less and less success. I don't know if anybody has a worse matchup against Alcaraz than Tsitsipas, but at least his baseline level of play should be significantly more up to the task, up to the challenge than it was last year. How much does that change the outcome? I don't know. Honestly, the most I could see is Tsitsipas taking a set. I think you have to back Alcaraz big time still in this one. And, it's just great that for both Sinner and Alcaraz, it seems like their injuries that plagued them throughout this clay court season, knock on wood, not having much of a bearing on their performance this French Open. And as a result, we are 2 matches away from, a match that all of us want to see, Sinner and Alcaraz in a slam again, after, their epic, classic US Open match back in 2022. And now finally, let's talk about Alexander Zverev. Obviously, I was watching very intently with his first round against Rafa Nadal, and he was pretty flawless. That was kind of expected. This is a match that he was looking forward to, probably as a bit of redemption from how ugly it ended for him in 2022. He was expecting a high level of tennis from Nadal, and he did get it. Nadal fought really well, but Zverev matched him every step of the way and looked the better player throughout the match. And watching it, it really was sort of a precursor of how the rest of this tournament has gone from. I literally was so frustrated. I was like Nuno Borges out there, and this guy would be more likely to just stink up the joint and play down to his competition than he would, putting the name Nadal out there on the other side of the net. And lo and behold, not even a week later, he finds himself deep in a fifth set. In fact, down a double break to Talon Griekspoor. And yeah, it's just a phenomenon that I've touched upon so many times. It's like Zverev with a lead, Zverev when it's needed to close, or it seems like he is close to achieving something big, he's close to crossing a finish line. And that's when he sort of seizes up, starts rolling the ball in. You see those double faults, you see some bad unforced errors, but then put him in a hole. And, this was flirting with disaster. 4-1 double breakdown in a fifth set. And honestly, typically I've seen Zverev, play more freely in those situations, but here it was more so. I think Greek sport sort of choking with the finish line in sight. Sasha took full advantage of it. And then, following it up with today, another fifth setter like Djokovic, back-to-back five setters in the third and fourth round. This one with Holger Rune, one that was pretty scratchy throughout. I wasn't very high on Holger coming into this tournament, obviously, because the struggles during clay court season. Very underwhelming clay court season from him. This after the last couple of years where he's had a couple of really elite clay court seasons. But this French Open, again, he flashed his talent. He flashed his, ever terrific fight. I always say it's like if Holger Rune could bottle up the player he is in the clutch, the player he is when he is boxed into a corner, there's zero doubt in my mind that guy would be a world beater. And he showed it again this tournament with, another Houdini escape against a peaking Flavio Caboli over the last three sets. Escaped a love 40 and really on his own merit in the tiebreaker. Despite going down 5-0 and 6-2, he came up with the goods to come all the way back. And you saw it again today a lot, at the back end of some of these tight sets. Obviously, end of the third set, Zverev really got comically tight, but at the end of some of these sets, it was very sort of Djokovician from Holger Rune, locking down, playing up to the occasion as he does, and he came very close to coming away with this match. Zverev had a chance, obviously, to serve us into a fifth set at 5-4, I think, in the fourth. Super tight game again during closing time. It ends with him hitting this floater sort of prayer of a return, just reflexed back, and not hitting the swing volley with any conviction at all. Holger Rune laces the pass by him, holds to love, starts love 15 down, and again you see the Zverev paradox. When he's down, suddenly his shots are coming with conviction and he's just locked down himself. I think it was something like a 31 shot rally down love 15, and Zverev just too solid, wouldn't buckle. Reinstated order from that point on. And then once we got to the fifth set, I think Holger's, stamina issues sort of resurfaced here. Obviously, I think he still gets a pass for that. He's still young enough where he can get a pass for that. It makes sense. He still hasn't gotten, that many reps in that situation. But ultimately, you don't get, style points Zverev through despite the back-to-back five-setters. Both times flirting with disaster. But I've seen this movie too many times with him. He remains one of the fittest players on tour, and again, for a potential match with Djokovic in the semis, I'm more confident in him bringing his best tennis to that match than I am him bringing his best tennis to either of the last two. That's just kind of how he functions, and he'll play de Minaur in the quarterfinals. Another shout out to Alex de Minaur, a guy whose improvement I never could have seen coming to this degree. I've often been very dismissive about Alex de Minaur, sort of just dismissing him as a guy who has nothing but heart and wheels. But this year he has morphed himself into more than that, definitely gotten stronger and capable of, some firepower from the baseline, actually. And, it's showed in his results. He's been like a top 10 level player all year. Wins over Djokovic and Nadal. Even though, circumstances pervade over those, they are wins over Djokovic and Nadal. And I think this is another super impressive one. Albeit I wasn't really high on Medvedev this clay court season. Just seemed like he too was, being held together by his consistency and grit more than anything, not playing particularly great. And obviously he divulged that he's been having shoulder issues, and that would explain and it wasn't really a competitive match. Demon left nothing to chance. Sizably the better player in this one, and makes just his second slam quarterfinal. And so obviously we are set up with Alcaraz, Tsitsipas, Sinner Dimitrov, Djokovic, Ruud, and Zverev de Minaur in the quarterfinals. Casper Ruud will never get a better chance to beat someone of Djokovic's caliber at this point in a Grand Slam. He is Novak Djokovic, but he is 37. There's no way that he is going to be operating on a full fuel tank. And I did worry about that actually for Casper, because he started this clay court season, of course, in glittering form. Got a win, actually, over Djokovic in Monte Carlo final. Won Barcelona, getting revenge on Tsitsipas in that final. But, you know, the rest of the clay court season, you can write off the Madrid loss, but weird loss to Kecmanovic in Rome after bageling the first set. And you wouldn't say he's been at his very best throughout this tournament. In fact, you know, he did take out the title in Geneva, but he had to play 2 matches in one day on Saturday before the tournament started, I believe. So, you know, I did have my concerns about him and how much tennis he's played. And, you know, the mileage on him has only gone up this tournament. He's had to go through, I think, like a 4-hour-ish match himself with the 5-setter over ADF in the second round. Couple of matches to get here against Echeverry and Fritz that ultimately he ended up pulling away in, but were probably tighter and more physical than they look on paper. But, you know, credit to him beating those guys, both who have shown to be pretty competent on clay, Taylor especially this year. And ultimately, if his body can take, regardless of if his body can take it, Ruud is going to have to make things physical. That's his path to victory here. But, you know, it's just hard for me to wrap my 2010s brain around Casper Ruud beating Novak Djokovic in a slam. So, you know, tentatively I'll still say Djokovic in 4 somehow, that you'll make it a priority to not get caught up in another one of these slugfests. As for Alcaraz, Tsitsipas, I'm tempted to say Alcaraz in straights again, but I'll give Stefanos a set. I'll say Alcaraz in 4. Stefanos in much better form this year, seems to be in a much better headspace, more willing to dig in and compete in ways that we recognize from him, you know, early on in his career up until like 2021, 2022. But he is playing the guy who I think has the highest ceiling on clay and is approaching the level of that ceiling as this tournament has gone. So I don't think Alcaraz is ever going to be in much danger. I say Alcaraz in 4. Sinner Dimitrov, as I said, you know, you never know when Pete Grigor will show up, but I'm not counting on it here. This is the surface where he's probably least equipped, even if he does show up. So I'll say Sinner over Dimitrov in straights. And then finally, Zverev, de Minaur. De Minaur again, someone that's not high profile enough that I could see Zverev again unnecessarily extending this match to 5. That combined with Demon's good form right now certainly makes that a possibility. But also Zverev also finds a way to avoid that and gets that done in 4. As this tournament has gone, it's been a lot of fun. I think this has been a pretty fun Roland Garros, albeit it's been saved by that Longland roof, because no better year to have that finally come into play than this one, given how much rain there's been at this year's French Open. Never seen weather like it here in Paris during the tournament. But yeah, I mean, that's made for some really intense chaos in the schedule, which has been fun to watch at times. As far as my predictions for the back end of this tournament, you know, as you can see, nothing's really changed. I still think Alcaraz over Zverev for the title. We'll cross that bridge for semifinals when we get there. Otherwise, that'll do it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see you all in the next one.